And so I'm going to invite some folks to come forward, and we're going to have a panel discussion and then allow you to respond in pairs to one another around what we can do to address Measure G. And so the first person I want to bring up, and y'all can just come right here, is Mary Lee. I'm gonna put you on the panel. We'll talk through. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna bring up Mary Lee. Mary Lee is no stranger to the Empowerment Congress. I think she's probably one of the OGs of the Empowerment Congress. But I am greatly indebted to her for all of her wonderful work around policy and how she's invested in the next generation, including me and my wife. And so we want to thank her for being here. Let's clap it up for Mary Lee. We want to bring up also Dr. Sarah. Do you want to go by Doctor or just Sarah? How you? We'll go by Sarah. Sarah, it will come. Sarah is a professor at Pomona. She was on the Redistricting Commission for the state of California, and she was on the Governance Reform Committee for the city and the county, and wrote papers around Measure G and what it could do for our community. And so let's clap it up for Sarah. And then the last person I want to bring up as to be a dialogue partner is Brother Gary. Brother Gary works at SJLI, Social Justice Learning Institute. He is the policy director at SJLI. He is the vice president of the school board in Linwood. And so he's coming from a college event. And so we want to bring him up as well. So we're going to make this a little informal because we've been sitting around. And so we're just going to have a conversation and let you all lean in a little bit around Measure G and what it means for the county. And so my first question is to Mary. Mary, what does the county do, and why does Measure G matter?
And golf courses. We'll try it again. Oh, wonderful. Parks and golf courses are within the jurisdiction of the county. There are some 180 of those. Also, the Hollywood Bowl is owned by the county and the Music Center. And the county maintains some educational facilities, including 84 libraries. And through the County Office of Education oversees 80 school districts. So you can see this is a great big mechanism. And in terms of the current governance, I just want to go through that real quickly. Right now, the county has had, and for some time, 5 elected members who serve 4-year terms. So that 10 million people I'm talking about gets divided into 5 districts, roughly 2 million each. They can serve 4-year terms and be reelected 2 times to serve a maximum of 12 years. That's the term limits for the county supervisors. And the board has executive, legislative, and quasi-judicial powers, and policies are introduced in the form of motions. And when I say that there are executive, legislative, and quasi-judicial, currently, prior to Measure G, the county does not have a mayor. It does not have an individual, a single individual that is whose responsibilities are superseding or higher than the other members of the board. And you may have noticed, if you pay attention to these kinds of things, that the presidency of the Board of Supervisors rotates among the current Board of Supervisors. So every couple of years it shifts. But I think we're going to see a lot of changes as Measure G gets implemented. So that was what I was supposed to do, give you a layout of what it was. If you want me to tell you a little bit about the terms of Measure G, I can, but I think it's better for our panel to open it up.
Yeah. So Mary, so thank you for giving us that context around what the county is, right? So we have this big government. You have about 10 million people. We have 5 supervisors, and we've had that for about 100 years or so. And now we have Measure G. So Sarah, you were a part of the academic committee that was thinking about how to redo reform. And on the city level, it turned into redistricting and independent redistricting. But on the county level, there was a question around, do we expand the seats? Do we have a county CEO? Can you give us some thinking just from your perspective of why a Measure G was even created?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so can y'all hear me on that? Okay, good. So I'll start. You mentioned the city piece, right? And so a bunch of scholars got together, as probably many of you know, because I'm sure all of you are in the loop. There were some leaked recordings. There's been a whole lot of city council members who have had their day in court. There are things that are not going well at the city level. So a bunch of scholars got together to think about what are the kinds of changes that we might want to enact, because people on the ground were saying we need changes. And so we began looking at that for the city, and we put together a host of reforms that ultimately the city council moved forward. Some of them in particular, we'll have an independent redistricting commission the next time redistricting comes along for the city of Los Angeles, as well as strengthening a lot of the ethics reforms to watch over members of the city council. I think what's unique about Measure G is that it wasn't so much being pushed by people on the ground. It was actually the supervisors themselves, and in particular, I would say Lindsay Horvath, who really came out saying, as a new member, I cannot wrap my head around how this county has been operating and functions. With 5 members who oversee $45 billion, it's not always clear who exactly is going to be accountable for how this money is actually being spent, or which districts get the fair amount of money, or which neighborhoods, quite frankly, because as Mary so well laid out, we have unincorporated neighborhoods, we have cities within, and you just get one person for 2 million individuals to try and dole out all of that money. So I think the process of how we arrived at Measure G was very different. That being said, that most of us from that same group of scholars came back together to take a look at Measure G and what was being proposed. And what we found in going back, looking at historical documents from the County of Los Angeles, as well as looking at county governance across the United States, is that Los Angeles is way behind because we have 10 million people and only 5 members to allocate $45 billion. And I think you absolutely do begin to see it, especially right now. I live very close to Altadena. I actually was just driving through the burn areas this morning. It is horrific. And I think regardless of, what you think about the management, and there's plenty of conversations going on about it. In the Pacific Palisades, we have a real clear structure of, people are going to turn to Mayor Bass as the figurehead and say, how are we going to move forward? When it comes to Altadena, an unincorporated area, who do we turn to? It should be Barger, but at the end of the day, she shares those responsibilities in many ways with the other 4 members of the Board of Supervisors. And so it's very easy in some regards for them to point fingers at who it is that's going to actually allocate those funds. So I think with Measure G, as it came across, some of the things that we learned in starting to take a look at county governance is that we've had this same structure since the founding of the county, in which there were far fewer than 10 million individuals living within the county. With 2 million people, it's almost impossible for a county supervisor to get to know all of their residents. Measure G increases the board to 9. And we looked at this question, is 9 the right number? Could it be 12? Could it be 20? We don't know, right? There's no magic formula for figuring out what that right number is. And so I think 9 was really a compromise, I think, amongst the supervisors of what they pushed forward. And we'll have to wait and see. These changes are going to go into effect in the coming years. And we'll have an opportunity to reassess and say, is 9 working for the county, or should it be more? Should we go back to 5? So those are pieces that I think communities in particular are going to need to be very involved in trying to assess to what extent this is actually working out. In terms of the creation of a county CEO, this was really seen as one of the best practices happening throughout the country. In about the 1970s, there was a real movement to push counties to develop an executive model. Typically, we would refer to the county governance as an committee structure, which is what we have. But at the end of the day, way, we hire one person to have 5 bosses to try and execute the work of the county. This brings us more in line with other forms of governance that we know here in the United States by creating an executive branch. So when we think about Congress and the federal government, we know, and most of us always learn this in school, there's 3 branches of government, right? There's the executive branch, the president, or at the state level, that would be the governor, or at the city level, it's the mayor. There's a legislative branch, which would be the council at the city, the state assembly and senate, or Congress. And then there's the judicial branch. But as Mary laid out, for the county supervisors, they have all of those powers. So there's no checks and balances because counties weren't necessarily originally meant to have so much power. They were seen as an extension of the state, as an administrative arm that would just simply deliver services. But I think what we've learned and seen over time is that counties do a whole lot. And so, I think Measure G was pushed forward to really develop that executive branch, to have those checks and balances between those two. I'll stop there. There's plenty more that we can talk about, ethics and so many other pieces, but I'll stop there.
Okay, so we got the landscape. So we know what the county does. Measure G creates a county CEO, an elected county CEO. And for people who do not know, if you're elected for a county-wide office, there are no term limits associated with that. And then it expands the board from 5 to 9. So, Gary, I'm coming to you. So we're in South LA. You're in Linwood as well. SJLI has been deep in Inglewood, which is another part of LA. And so for a long time, South LA was represented by Kenny Hahn. And then after Kenny Hahn, we had Yvonne Bathray Burke. And then after that, we had the Honorable Mark Riley Thomas. And now we have Holly Mitchell, Supervisor Holly Mitchell. What does Measure G mean for you as a resident of Linwood, as doing work in Inglewood? What does it mean for it to expand from 5 to 9? And what does the county CEO potentially mean?
Well, I think for me that if there's a lot of questions that I have that have yet to be answered as an elected official, I tend to always look at policy first. We don't switch it. I may have turned it off by accident. And trying to understand the implications of policy, some that are obvious, some that are unintended, and trying to understand from my perch what I'm responsible to do for my community. With Measure G, one of the reasons why at SLI we were in opposition is because there were some key questions that just weren't answered just for us yet. And I give you an example. If in Linwood we had an elected superintendent and elected board, we, like the county does, share a general counsel. When there's conflict between the board and the superintendent, typically the council plays like tiebreaker. But when we asked the question as to how that would sort of impact the expansion of the county and elected CEO, that answer wasn't clear enough for us to really understand what happens when there is that judicial conflict that arises. The second thing that I would say that sort of gave me pause is, by show of hands, is anybody in the room that was a part of the discussion in the community about Measure G? If you were part of the discussions about Measure G before it hit the ballot in the room, raise your hand. Just one. So some of the things that my esteemed panelists are saying today, I'm hearing for the first time, because there wasn't a robust community outreach effort where people like me or my neighbors, folks that I represent, could ask questions about what this means for us and how it impacts our neighborhoods. As a researcher at SGLI, one of the first questions that I did ask was, why 9? And I really didn't get a clear answer. You sort of alluded to there being different models. I looked at Chicago's Cook County. They have half the population we have in LA, and they have 17. In New York, there's about half the population we have. They have 9. So it's like, sort of, why was this the magic number? So again, I have more questions than I have answers about how this impacts me, and that's what sort of worries me. I'm the person, as a personal person, I hate to be in the dark. I hate to not know what I'm walking into, and that's what Measure G feels like for me. And I feel like the method by which it was put on the ballot was not the right one. Now, I will say that I do agree that the county board should expand. We've been seeing this graphic all over social media that there's more people in LA County than like 30 plus other states in the US. Our governments inherently are incredibly bureaucratic and over complex, but I'm wondering if this makes it more complex by creating a new person in the mix that may not have the best intentions in mind. And the last thing I'll say is, and I'll move on to the next question, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but as we saw the fires raging across LA County, you saw folks lining up to make it a political moment to prop up their political careers. My worry with an elected CEO is it'll be just that you may have somebody that has the money and resources to get elected, but is woefully unqualified to be in that position, like we see in the White House now. You had, Rick Caruso was on the news talking about what he would have done Monday morning quarterbacking about what Mayor Bass should have done, while simultaneously paying for private firefighters to protect his businesses instead of his neighbors. That's the kind of person that I'm worried about running for county CEO and moving us away from what we know is best for our communities. And you get that when you have a position that is sort of not in lockstep with what is the proper design for our community. Now, again, all that being said, again, I do think that the county should expand, but to what extent, I'm not sure. How it impacts me in Linwood, I'm not sure. I was in Supervisor Mitchell's district before redistricting, and I missed that being the case in Linwood as the only Black elected official in my city in 30 years. So the other thing I'm worried about is, does this dilute some of the Black strongholds of power that we have? Now, and I'll say that the people that were supporting you, I think were well-intended. There's parts of our county that are not represented, our AAPI community specifically. But as Black folks, we know what it's like to not have a voice at the city table. So I could have empathy there. But I'm believing do nothing about me without me. So I'm hoping in this process there's opportunity to look at it and see and make sure that there is community voice considered, so that we make sure we have the right number and the right model and the right structure to truly serve people.
So thanks for that, Gary. So I want to go back to Mary Lee, and ask you to respond to what you're hearing, but also you gave a good outline of the county. Can you tell us what exactly does a county CEO do? What is a county CEO? Because I don't think a lot of people, when they read it, or now that it's going to happen in 2028, people don't really know what that is. So can you explain what that means for us?
Okay, so this particular proposal or measure has room in it, from what I understand, to build that out. I don't think it's been defined what this CEO would do. So I don't think it's been defined yet what the current ideation of a CEO in the county under Measure G would look like. I think there's a lot of space in that measure, the way I read it, to build out some of these questions, the CEO role and the ethics roles. That is a concern to me, and I was, like many of you, very blindsided by the fact that the measure was on the ballot. I very much have watched and monitored the belief that the county government ought to expand, that the board ought to expand, but how that would happen and under what circumstances and what roles, I very strongly believe ought to be a community-driven process, and community ought to understand it and advocate for it. And with absolute deference to the fact that academics are a very, very important place to get information, research, a scan of what else is happening all over the country, implications for how decisions are implemented. I don't think that's the first place you should start. I think it's actually the wrong thing to do to give the academics the ability to define the questions. I think the questions ought to be answered in concert with academics. But having said that, there are a couple things I want to do real quickly, because when you were speaking about the intent to have a larger board be more representative of the population that it serves, there's something to be very careful with, because a larger number of staff members doesn't automatically equate to better representation, but it is a likelihood. And so we have to really build in a process if you have more more supervisors, that means that people have more access to their local government, and the fires are a clear example of why you need that. But it really begs the question of cost, because we have no idea yet from this measure how much it will cost and where the money for it will come. And that really goes to the question of how representative your elected official would be. So if you have a very affluent person who's serving in a role of a county supervisor, they might be able to do some things with their office that someone who comes from the community, is a more working class kind of person, would be looking to have resources in their office to be able to staff up, to have communications, to do other sorts of things. In any event, the cost of government is something that you ought to look at the beginning, and I think this particular measure is building that in, and so you'll be building the plane as you fly it. So the last thing is your question. So I'm sorry, I was trying to get to your question. The question of what a CEO could do is much like the administrative and executive functions. You alluded to it, the president in the federal government, the governor in the state of California, the mayor in local governments. It is this executive function that takes direction from the body, which would be the legislative body, the county supervisors, but also takes some direction from the overall county that you serve, handles the budget and monitors and makes sure of compliance of the budget, is responsible for folks meeting in the various departments, and that is a very key role in the county. The operation of all these departments, which sound sort of innocuous, is really the guts of county government. And as many of you may have noticed over the years, our county government is fairly dysfunctional. You hear about terrible, terrible performance issues in the Department of Children and Family Services, in the juvenile justice system, bad cost overruns, abusive staff, young people dying on county watch, to say nothing of the explosion of homelessness. In every area that I mentioned that the county has responsibility, there's also a large performance issue about how well the county is operating. But in theory, an executive officer would have responsibility for making sure that all those departments were performing adequately. And there'd be checks and balances, and the supervisors would have a role in playing to make sure that they would be serving. Are you not able to hear me? I'm sorry. I still can't hear me. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do with is that echo in here? Speak. All right, okay. I'll stop talking. How about that?
No, you're good. You're good, Mary. So Sarah, Mary was just outlining what a county CEO could do, talking about representation. So you served on the statewide redistricting. And in order for Measure G to be implemented, they have to expand the supervisors. So what would that process kind of look like from your perspective? And what do you think the engagement should be in places like South LA and beyond? And then also, I want you to respond also to what do you think a county CEO could do or look like in LA County, knowing that we have over 40-something departments as well.
So let me start. Oh, that was really loud. Working now. Let me start with the last question because it dovetails so well with what Mary was talking about with the CEO piece, and then we can talk about independent redistricting. So first of all, I want to completely agree with you that I do believe that this should have come from the community. Long before I was a professor of political science, I worked in social justice organizations here in Los Angeles for Asian Americans Advancing Justice, for CHIRLA. I agree. I think that's a better way, a better model. We were brought in after the motion was already written to say, hey, what do you guys think about this? So I just want to lay that out there. I do think communities should be involved in moving these pieces forward. what can a CEO do from what we looked at? Research has shown, because yes, and I think you laid this out, Cook County, Wayne County, Michigan, Philadelphia, Miami-Dade, I believe the county that is in Portland, which I should have written, King County, they all have elected CEOs for their county. And so research done by others, not by us, but that we found and referred to, finds that in counties with CEOs, they actually deliver more services to people, and they do so more efficiently and more cost effectively. So that those are some of the findings of actually having these CEOs present, is that the administration of governance is improved. That is in other places. And Los Angeles is its own beast for 1,000 different ways. So I think the onus will be on the supervisors, on this new CEO, and on all of us who will have to hold them accountable to ensure that we actually get to such a place here in Los Angeles as well. Context matters. So just because, Miami-Dade allegedly has more services doesn't mean that's immediately going to happen here in Los Angeles. So I think we have to hold people accountable to actually achieve that. Switching gears to talk about independent redistricting. Was anyone here involved in redistricting? Did you call in either to the state commission, the county? Perfect. It requires engagement of everybody to actually have districts that are drawn in such a way that they reflect the needs of communities. I was very proud to serve on the state's Independent Redistricting Commission. I get it. Not everybody likes the fact that it even exists. But I think it's an opportunity for folks to weigh in. And you have a group of, as I call it, and some of the things I've been writing, a bunch of do-gooders, right? I'm like just a professor who's trying to do right. We had pastors as a part of the redistricting commission. We had educators. We had school board members. We had organizers, engineers, local folks who do not run for political office, except for the school board members, perhaps. But I think that sometimes can be a little bit of a different political trajectory. So the people who end up serving on independent redistricting commissions are not politicians. And I would say overwhelmingly, all of us, Democrats, Republicans, and independents who served on the state commission, I was so proud of my colleagues because every single one of them came with a desire to serve, a desire to listen to communities on the ground. There was not a single individual on the state's commission that had any animosity towards the Voting Rights Act. In fact, I was shocked so many of my Republican colleagues felt passionately about upholding the VRA. The way that these ordinary folks can draw the districts is to have everyday community members get involved in that process, to call in, to send emails, to show us, to draw your own set of lines, to show us, hey, this is where my community lies. So I was involved at the state level. It was incredibly difficult to draw Congress and state legislative seats for Los Angeles. There are changing demographics, particularly in South Los Angeles. So I think that's going to continue to be the case by the time we get to 2030. But I think that, so many community members were involved and pushed for districts that reflected historically Black South Los Angeles, even when the Voting Rights Act didn't necessarily require the drawing of a Black majority district per se. And I think that we all felt really good about where we landed in having served to the best of our ability the representational needs and requests from communities on the ground, not only for the Black community, but also for Asian Americans and Latinos. And so I think that's where independent redistricting can be your friend, so long as folks are involved. At the county level, they already have an independent redistricting commission. And actually, one of the recommendations of the county's redistricting commission was that we need to have an expansion of the board. They really came away from that process feeling like they cannot keep all of these communities together. With 2 million people, you're connecting communities that some of which are incredibly underserved with those that are very wealthy. That may not necessarily be good for those communities to get the adequate representation that they need and deserve. So in expansion of the board was actually one of the recommendations coming out of the county's redistricting, which I wasn't personally a part of, but certainly was there.
Okay, so we have a new CEO. In order to draw the district to expand the board, there's going to be a redistricting commission that all of us should be paying attention to make sure that we don't get drawn out of all the power. Gary, tell me how, when you're talking to community folks, what is the greatest way for community to impact the implementation of Measure G? It's already here. It's passed. There will be a county CEO in 2028. There will be an expansion of the Board of Supervisors in 2030. What should the community be looking at and doing in this moment?
I think the first task for the community is really not their responsibility, and that's to get educated on what this is and what it requires. In organizing, education is the first step before there is an action. We have to understand that there is a problem in order to organize around it. So I think before we could ask the community to do anything, we need to make sure that they're aware of what's happening. Secondly is sort of trying to pay attention to when the call goes out for a redistricting meeting or commission meeting that you're involved and engaged. In the meetings that I was in on redistricting here in SoCal, there's very few of us on the call that weren't doing this professionally. So I'm curious about or hoping that the average neighbor in my community is just going to be involved so they can give the proper nuance to what's happening. When we talk about equity, that means that we all get what we need to succeed, but we won't get what we need as a community unless we're at the seat and at the table making decisions, but also asking the right questions. And I will say I'm a politician because I'm involved in politics. But as a politician, we often feel like we have the answers and we have all the bright ideas, but oftentimes our ideas are not sort of tested by community voice and nuance in the right way. This redistricting has to be nuanced properly. There's historical considerations that must be made around LA County that some people just may not be aware of unless you're really keenly aware of your history. That a lot of the history in the Black community is held in oral history. It's not written down anywhere for you to Google. So those folks must be at the table. I think about my mom who moved to Watts in 1950. And if you look around LA County, you won't see much mention of Linwood being a sundown town, or the fact that Black folks could not cross the train tracks in Alameda after a certain time. But that's part of the history that you must understand in preserving parts of the county and making sure that we'll make the mistakes of the past. So I think just being involved in these conversations as a community member, you may not feel powerful, you may not be on a commission, you may not be elected, but your voice should still be as important as those of us who had the honor of being elected. So I would say, it's our responsibility as activists or to organizers to start to have these discussions to get folks ready for when the call goes out. So we're not trying to, play from behind. I think back to Measure J and how that turned into a fight of power between Black and brown folks, and we just can't have that. We have to have solidarity. We have to center Blackness where it is needed to do so, but we have to make sure that we're just a part of that conversation. I remember my ED for SLI, Derek Steele, and I were like, we're gonna have to stand in the way a little bit to make sure that we make sure this conversation is had in the right way and the right folks at the table. So I wrap up into saying that, again, I get annoyed with my colleagues on my school board, and I didn't know this, it's no secret to them, when they say parents are saying something and they talk to 3 parents, right? That's not a good enough number for you to say what parents are saying. So again, I'm hoping the county would do what it should have been doing and talk to the community about how they see this measure is best implemented and how the lines should be drawn, how we preserve historical context and don't dilute power, and lastly, don't pit communities of color against each other in a power struggle.
All right. Mary, I'm going to ask you one more question, because I always love gleaming from your policy wisdom. It sounds like, from what we're discussing here, that in Measure G, there are some parts of the policy that are not yet figured out. So, from your perspective, in this room with community, how can the community affect those policy decisions, and what is the real opportunity for equity in those policy decisions?
That's a big question. Well, the first thing really is this point about education, which is essential. And it's unfortunate, I think, that it's not going to be something that will be easily accessible. But folks will have to use the Empowerment Congress, other vehicles, whether it's your church group, your fraternity, your sorority, whatever groupings that you have, to learn a little bit about what's being said and what the processes are. They'll be in this process, from at least the way I read the measure, both for the creation of the CEO and the build out of the supervisor's offices and how that all gets funded. There'll be a process, and that process will be subject to public participation, but it is not a given that it will be widely publicized or easily accessible. And that is unfortunately just a tenet of the way government, and particularly local government, tends to work. They don't necessarily use the best, we can get a video to go viral in seconds, but unfortunately you often have to find a website and scroll through it and get to the notices and get yourself listed on the place where notices get sent, and et cetera, et cetera. That's why I'm advising that folks would try to work through a group rather than just one person. It is a big hill to navigate. But know that those opportunities are there, and you have to be able, again, to make the most of them, to make your comments, and not just to phrase your concerns as a criticism, although that's very valid. I think you should register the criticism. But I would always suggest that whenever you're critiquing a policy or observing a gap or a deficiency, you propose what the solution should be. Because I think what we often do is defer to our electeds or defer to people who are in administrative positions to say, well, I've told you I have a problem, you're going to come up with the answer. Unfortunately, the answer is probably not going to be the one you need, and they're not going to take into account what your real issues are. So whenever you can, suggest what you want to see happen. Let them tell you why they can't do it rather than assume that they're going to do it. Real quickly, to try and address the equity question, and this is a big one because I think that the fires unfortunately provide us with a lot of examples to learn from and to be cautious about, and especially on this issue of representation. So just to give you a little bit of an irony that I heard listening to the news, Supervisor Barger represents the area, Altadena area that was so severely damaged. She also represents Santa Clarita, which just had another little flare up of fire, and I have relatives that live out that way. They had to evacuate for a couple of days, and I kept thinking how wild that is, that these massive differences, the space between Santa Clarita and Altadena is inordinate. I don't want to drive that way. I'm a bad driver, and the realities and the communities are very, very different. And yet that one person is the office that would be the go-to office. And my guess would be, and this is no shade on Supervisor Barger, she rarely hears from either side. She's really not out every week visiting Altadena, certainly, or visiting Santa Clarita. So that's not where the juice is. That's not the squeaky wheel that it's not necessarily that she serves an area that needs more services. Those areas both have needs, but I'm imagining that that's not where she's mostly spent her time. So having access to more supervisors who are able to respond is a quality of equity, but it is not an automatic thing. And so equity, and as was just described, it is responding to what an actual need is and not treating everything identically. People often talk about equal opportunity, and equal opportunity sounds as if it's very noble, it's a great thing, let's love equal opportunity, but equal opportunity is pretty much giving everybody the same thing. But you don't always need the same thing that someone else has. In fact, sometimes what you're given, if it's identical, puts you in a worse situation or doesn't respond at all. So very simplistically, if you were to say equality would be giving everybody a pair of shoes, but equity would be giving them a pair of shoes that fit. And some people don't have feet. Some people don't walk. So you really have to take into account what people's circumstances and situations are. The ability of a process like this one, where they're revising a government, where they're reforming a charter. The charter is the sort of constitution of the county. The city charter is also subject to reform right now. I worked on the reform of the last one. um, these are places where typically you don't see equity lifted up. And what I'm at least suggesting is that we look to infuse and inject specifically, intentionally, directly equity opportunities, equity outcomes into the charter document, into the design of the supervisor's office and the CEO's office from the outset. Then it's in there. You still have to keep an eye on it to enforce it. That is the role of a resident of the city, of the county. Doesn't always come easy. The last thing I just want to say about that is that we put this obligation, I think you're talking about this as well, we put this obligation on people and say, well, you're welcome to come and, weigh in and watch us and comment, but there's never an understanding that that comes at a great cost. It comes at a great cost to you as a resident to take your time to look at all these documents, to monitor the websites, to call your elected officials. But I'll say to you that the opposite is you don't get the representation that we fought so hard for. So you have to put the time in. It isn't fair, it's not equitable, but we have to work harder to get just the minimum representation and service.
Sarah, we're going to come to audience questions after this. We're going to do a lightning round. Just tell me what is your hope for a new Los Angeles with Measure G? And then Gary, same question to you.
I don't know that I have terribly inspirational words about a hope for Measure G. I hope that this works out well, but I do think that it comes down to the implementation. The devil is absolutely in the details. I'll add to all of this. So I don't work for the county, but I understand that I believe it was in December that they passed a motion putting into motion an implementation task force that will be somewhere between 11 to 13 people, I believe. I think someone from the county was just here who just left. No? He just left. Okay. They might know better than I would. An implementation task force is an opportunity for people to serve on it. Maybe it's someone in this room. Independent redistricting commissions. Apply for them. Now is the time to actually start thinking about them. For the state's commission, you have to stay registered with your political party for the next 5 years. So it's 2025, that means now. I am happy to help any organization out there get folks ready to apply to serve on all of these commissions, because there's going to be one at the city of Los Angeles, county, and state. When I apply, I didn't even want to apply. I had other people asking me if I was going to apply. I had organizations that sent emails saying, I'll help you with your application. Otherwise, I would not have done it. And I think organizations right now can be thinking about putting in the infrastructure, getting the grants that they might need in order to do that kind of work, to make sure folks feel prepared to apply for independent redistricting commissions, to serve on these task force, to participate in the city's process around charter reform that's going to move forward as well. So I think organizations, I hope, can play these roles to get folks more involved. I hope that philanthropy is going to be supportive of organizations doing this kind of work. And certainly, at least when it comes to independent redistricting commissions, having served on one, I am happy to be a resource to whomever is interested in serving on a commission, because I do think people need that support. I needed that support. I needed someone to read the essays that had to be written and think about who should write my letters of recommendation for this. These aren't things that I was sitting around thinking about. I'm a mom of 3, a working mom of 3. I didn't really think that this was something I wanted to go out and do. And then I was selected to do it. So my great hope is that we continue to grow as Los Angeles. I mean, I think as devastating as these fires have been, and trust me, like I said, I live right there. We were evacuated for a week. And thankfully we are safe and our home is still standing. But my goodness, where there is one home, there's complete devastation on the rest of the streets. The silver lining to all this that I'm seeing, if there is anything, is seeing Angelenos come together And I do think that across the city and county that we have a real love for one another in these times of crisis. And I hope that that love continues and that we can build and continue to grow this thriving Los Angeles. We are not without problems throughout the county of Los Angeles, but I do hope that the spirit of collaboration, of working together across different communities continues as we move into the implementation of Measure G, because it's going to take all of us to be involved to make sure that we have the kind of representation, the kind of governance that we actually want.
So for me, I think that my hope is that this measure does what it was sold to us to do, which is to make the county better, make it serve better, make it work better. And as I said before, it's going to require us to really lean in to make sure that that happens. And I think as an elected official on the school board, I see a lot of the ways the county can improve. And I'll add a plug that if I were part of this discussion about how the county should change, I would say that the LACO board should be an elected board. Because when you have structures within a community like mine where you have an elected board that gets to be overridden by appointed board members, I think there's an imbalance of power, right? So there's things that I know that the county can do better at, but it's going to require our voices to make sure that that is the case. So, when I think about when you buy a used car and it's a sign that says "as is," that's sort of what we've been given as a county. This is you get what you pay for. We've been paying for this county to operate in a way that doesn't serve us well. I think it's time to trade in that car for something better, right? But in that conversation, we have to make sure that what is done is done best for a community, and to ensure that services are not suffering, as a consequence. And even as a former congressional staffer, I think about if our office was split in two and our funding was split in two, could we serve in the same way we did as a whole office? So I think about the individual services that the different county offices will provide for community. And when you're trying to make a phone call right now about, how to rebuild your home that was destroyed in the fire, like, will you be given the runaround because there's too many people in the process, or can you talk to someone that knows your community, is from your community? So the questions that I have, I'm hopeful they will be solved through the process of implementation, that there's community voice included. And at the end of the day, the way this was sold to us and rush to the ballot, I'm hoping that comes true. Right? Now, that being said, I know sometimes, we can be cynical about what we've seen. We've seen this before, heard it before, hasn't worked. I'm a person that lives in a place of optimism. That's why I do the work that I do. And if I felt like the world could not get better, I could just go find a farm somewhere and retire. I've been on the school board for 12 years, started at 26. I gave my mid-20s to elected office because I felt like my community could get better. We have to not resign ourselves to see what we see now as the ultimate reality. We have the power to reimagine and reinvent and innovate a better future for ourselves, so long as we stick our foot in the door when they try to close it on us and barge our way into these conversations so that they hear us and understand the needs for our community. So again, I think that our clarion call and call to action is to get involved. And again, as was stated, it's not easy to get involved. Like I said, I alluded to the folks that are in the room that we get paid to be involved in these discussions. We have all of the emails flagged. We have all the notifications. But the average person that's working and not retired, it's going to take a lift for you to be a part of it. But I would think that given the effort and the lift, as opposed to being left out of the conversation, is the appropriate action for you to take to push in, make sure that you're heard at the table as well.
Awesome. We got room for 2 to 3 audience questions. Questions, not speeches. All right. I'm going to go 1, 2, and then Harry, I'm going to skip you and go to the young lady in the back. 3. All right. So 1, 2, 3.
Awesome. My name is Christian Green. I'm from Sanctuary Folk. I'm also in the Antelope Valley. My question is in relation to like the CEO and like once they get elected. I don't need a mic. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. I got a preacher voice. All right. So once the CEO is elected, is there opportunity to us to revisit this being an elected seat? And how is that going to work in ties to now we have a mayor of the county, then we have a mayor of the city. Like, what does that even look like? Looking at, I don't know, how do we do that?
My understanding, what was written into Measure G is that right now they should be developing this implementation task force. I believe that has been slowed down because of the fires, but I believe the motion was already passed to set in motion an implementation task force now. Starting in 2032, it is my understanding, because by 2032, the 9 members should be seated following census and redistricting. In 2032, they are also supposed to launch a, I forget exactly the term they were calling it, but another governance reform task force that would be permanent, so that we don't have to wait for a charter reform commission to pop up once every 20 years because the political environment allows it to happen, but instead so that people can monitor how this is rolling out and offer new changes. So there's an implementation task force now that should be put in motion sometime very soon. And then come 2032, there is supposed to be a permanent body that assesses the running of county governance. And that is where you could make those kinds of changes. There was one other part of your question, I forget.
How will the county mayor and the
I think this is the $1 million, the $45 billion question. This is going to be an incredibly powerful position potentially. If you think about it, we only have a handful of county-wide elected officials: the sheriff, the assessor, and the district attorney. So this is going to be one of very few. I think that's a relationship that's going to have to be worked out. We'll have to see who ends up running, who ends up winning a seat like this. No doubt it is going to be an incredibly expensive race to run county-wide in a county of 10 million people, bigger than many states. Yeah.
I'm going to add to Christian question. One of the things I've heard people say about a county CEO is that it's basically like creating a governor for Southern California. Is that an accurate statement from your perspectives up here?
The question that I had was, why wouldn't the chair of the board have those functions? But again, I think that the way you're describing it as governor of Southern California kind of makes sense. But again, I'm just curious, thinking about probably doomsday in times of conflict. How is that tie broken, or where does the county council fall? Again, it's a question that we haven't had answered.
Okay. And I think remember that county government in many ways has been a representative of state government. So when you were talking before about why county governments even exist throughout the state, they've always been sort of the way that people got those services met at those regional levels. So now you're turning around the other way, and yes, you'd see something very much like a governor type role, an executive type role. And because Southern California, and particularly Los Angeles County within the Southern California region, is so large and has so much money, I think that would be a very good description as the governor of Southern California. Beware, though, when you do that, and if people start talking about it like that, the attitude of splitting this state up is in people's minds, and it's not something to just write off as a fringe belief, as so many fringe beliefs that we might have lived with in the past decade have now come to fruition. Be wary of those beliefs that could divide, and the pros and the cons of dividing California into 2 states. Well, you asked that question. I don't know that it got answered. You asked, the last part of your question was, how could this be undone once it's underway? And yes, an election could undo any component of what this is. Whether there would be super majorities needed I doubt it, because I think it was passed by majority rule. But so you wouldn't have to have a super majority. Yeah, so a 51% vote, I won't do it.
You. Is this one?
Thank you. Carolyn Fowler, Government Affairs, LAUSD. My question has to do with the equity position that you have, and I totally agree with it. However, this past Board of Supervisors meeting, Holly Mitchell tried to get equity into a process and it was defeated. I want everybody in this room to know that. So what should we be doing when our own current board is not supporting equity?
Well, I'd say what should we always do when our elected officials aren't representing our needs? Organize, mobilize, activate, get busy. Gary's the organizer on the panel, and I've watched the Empowerment Congress and its companion organizations throughout the city and region and the county make their voices heard and make a change. But we have to stay consistent. We have to, as folks talked about earlier, work collectively, and we have to raise the issue. Just real quickly, what's at stake? Again, the fires provide us with these learning opportunities. Altadena is a little tiny component of the county, but it has been a oasis in many ways, and an example of the creation of generational wealth in a climate where it's almost been next to impossible. I don't even know if the people who live there know as much of how much of a beacon that has been for those of us in the rest of the region. I grew up in, straight in the middle of South LA, but I always knew that Altadena was a place where people were living and sharing and building their own little family legacies right there, and in a minute it swept away. And do we worry about what's going to happen in terms of the response? We can learn lessons from what happens in Detroit when Black people get pushed out and the city's not serving their needs, in New Orleans when Katrina sweeps through and knocks out the whole Black community, and watch how they rebuild or don't, and who they rebuild for. So we know what's going to happen if we don't come together and speak up, and we have to on exactly that issue. If equity's not good enough to be in this measure, then what's up? We need to ask those questions and make sure we get the right answer.
I just want to say, I think that one of our challenge right now is that there's a almost universal consensus that equity means Black folks. And I think that's part of the problem. People hear you trying to center Blackness, they push back, right? So I think that it's important that we sort of organize around how important that is, even when we are centering Blackness in the Black community, right? That Superwoman Mitchell is not by herself in this. That it's not a fringe thought. That when you live with rising tides, all boats are lifted. So we can't have folks think that Black means Black only when it comes to equity, but we all benefit when Black folks do better.
When Black people do better, we all do better.
I am a former department head for LA County, Department of Public Social Services. I retired after 50 years of service with LA County. And I tell you that to say I do know the county. So one of the things, there are a couple of things that bother me about this. I don't worry so much about the expansion to 9. I don't know how they're going to do it without any increase in budget. That's not going to happen. The main thing, a concern for me, and I hope it's a concern for everyone here, is that CEO position. One of the things you talked about now is that you don't know who the CEO is. That's a good thing, because that person, I do know her personally. She's in there and she's doing a fantastic job, but she doesn't have that kind of power that you're going to see with this position. Somebody mentioned, is that going to be a second governor? This person is going to have so much power, not just in LA County, I mean across the nation. When you look at it, for me, this was the largest social services agency in the nation. When we came to the room, it was like how LA goes, so goes the state. So that's how much power this person has. In dealing with the supervisors, I had 5 bosses, but then it was the CEO that kept everything together. Each board knows what they want and they come in with their own agenda. And what she has to do is to I should work with each one of them to say, okay, I know you want this bill, but guess what? I have so-and-so over here, so how do you want me to do it? How do you think I'm going to pay for this and do that? If you get this person, and I know who's lined up for this, whoever can buy it, and we know who can buy it because he tried to buy the mayor's job. Once he's in there and he controls this budget, which, as we talked about this being the 5th largest economy in the nation, LA County makes that so for the state. So that's the kind of power that this person's going to have. Now, what I want you to think about is what the problems that the board had with the other elected officials. Right now, they get along with the assessor's good, the DA is good, but the sheriff. You remember what happened with the sheriff? And the sheriff said to them, I'm just as powerful as you are. You can't tell me what to do. I'm elected just like you are. Have the CEO do that. And so what's going to happen is that they're going to be beholding all of them to a CEO that has power that no one else can even touch. We have to be very careful because right now what happens is that the board hires the CEO. And so they report to all of them. When this person is elected, whoever comes in with the most money, and they're going to spend our money the way they want to. They don't have a board to answer to. That's the thing that was not clear in all of this and that we need to make sure that we address, because that's all that's going to happen. And folks, we really need to speak up and keep this CEO from being a political job, because that's what it's going to. It's going to change and be political. Not to mention all the other issues that are going to happen that I can see happening because of this new organization. But that is the key. That's the number one that's going to be problematic for us.
All right. All right. We got one more question over here.
Will this person have term limits, and how many years will the?
So I want to just, I stated this earlier that in the county of Los Angeles, if you are elected to a countywide office, there are no term limits. There are no term limits for a countywide office. So right now in the county of Los Angeles, the district attorney, the DA, is not a term limit position. The sheriff is not a term limited position. So if you have an elected county CEO for the entire county, it won't be term limited. Is there another question? Harry. And then I'll come back to you.
Because they're set by various levels of government. So we voted in the city of Los Angeles to impose term limits on our city council and on our mayor. And that could happen for the county, but it would have to go through that process. It's not automatic. And it might need to happen not just for the CEO. It might need to happen for all elected offices in the county.
Cheryl kind of alluded to it. I have a question about the budget part of it. When MRT was in the county, what really was nice was the staff people that he could send out there. Now, if you're going to have 9 districts, are you still going to have that same type of staff coverage? Has that, excuse my ignorance, but has that been determined in the measure or not?
To the best of my knowledge, that has not been addressed directly. I think that, again, all of this is going to come down to what's implemented, but I think the general concept was that if you cut from 5 to 9, then the offices themselves must get smaller per member, because you're now serving just over 1 million people as opposed to 2 million people. So spreading those resources across 9 as opposed to 5.
If you're getting ready to change things, one of the things that a body of some sort might comment on is right now, and this is true of the city council, of the state legislature, of any place where you have elected officials, there really isn't a template for how you operate. So you can have an elected official who doesn't come into the office, takes off, barely manages anything, doesn't fill out their positions, and they get paid the same way that somebody that works really hard and is very responsive. I happen to believe that when Mark Ridley Thomas was a supervisor, he set a standard for the way in which he operated his office and his staff responded to and dealt with the problems of his district. And it was a very unique way of operating. You don't get that automatically. He brought that with him. He brought that integrity with him. He operated that way as a city council representative as well. So maybe what we need is a formula or a format for how elected officials serve their constituents, and we could at least have a minimum standard for what you see out of an elected official. But right now, that doesn't exist. That's totally within the purview of the person elected to office of how responsive they'll be. They could say the phone should never ring more than twice, or they could say put that thing on, record, or just don't give out the phone number. It's up to them.
It's implementation. So my understanding is the supervisor, and I think the person from the county is back. My understanding is that the supervisors passed a motion in December, putting in motion an implementation task force that is supposed to work on many of these questions. But you all would probably know that better.
Number of people, because that's always going to be part of the budget process. So each of the board members we advocate to either get more funding for more salary for more workers, or we find different ways to put our team members to get salary. So like, for example, my position, I'm an assistant director of Unincorporated. I get funded through a special electrical tax, that electricity tax. That's my team. We found that funding. We got it in there so we could specifically work for unincorporated areas. So that's going to be it's not going to be determined in a task force, but it's going to be determined in the future when the budget comes around. That's to come. It won't be made now. It'll be made when the board offices, when the expansion happens. It's not going to be made because I don't see it. It's not inscribed within the task force. The task force is just to dictate how everyone's going to be introduced into the new the CEO, how everyone's going to be introduced to all that. So that's the difference.
All right, we got one more question down here. Sorry, brother. I'll come to you too. We got two more questions. We'll do one here, one there, and then we'll wrap this up.
Thank you for having this today, and I want to speak to what you were speaking about, how to engage the community. I'm just a resident here who loves my community and want to see it. I have that optimistic view as well. But then how do we engage just somebody who is like me? I don't sit on no board. I just live here and I want to live better. And so, yeah, I'm interested in being on, maybe a task force to ask these questions to see how it is implemented. So we're passing all this and there's no implementation. So, yeah, I'm interested in that. So
I would just say that one thing Supervisor Mitchell's office does very well is they do outreach for input. They call people and invite them to the table. They send out flyers, send out emails. I'm not even in this anymore, but I'm still getting the emails and flyers about things that are happening. From my district, I've gotten 0 in the last 2 years. So the offices have to have an intentional mechanism, an activity to reach out to folks that normally would be missed, just so that they're part of the conversation. So it's really, again, it's not really on us to do the outreach, but when they reach out to us, that we respond in a way. And if we can't go, send somebody in our stead. But I just admonish all the offices to take Supervisor Mitchell's lead and reaching out to people and inviting folks. Too often there's public hearings that happen and public's not a part of it because they don't know about it. But really want to include folks, you remove the jargon in the language and reach out to the people that should be at the table.
And I'll give a shameless plug. You see people walking around with their Power of Congress shirts on. They create working groups, which can help you navigate some of these systems as well. So talk to
Real quickly, my name is Tanya Bashirs. I live in the community 45 years. I own 7 homes down the street. I like to say, since Supervisor Bradford Burf got out, you have people like Wendy Starworth Tate, the deputies, Ernestine Wilson, who's deceased, Big Dr. Smith, Little Dr. Smith. We always had the information in the community. I live right across the tracks. You don't get the flyers. You don't get the information. No, everybody comes out of our community and want to plan for us. I remember years ago, we never had, people used to say, oh, Tanya, you need to come. We need a mayor, Willowbrook. We never had anyone to represent us in unincorporated. So when you had complaints, unless you knew these people, Wendy Stallworth Taylor, you guys know that name, the deputy, she lived on 118th Street with her family, the Ballou. So see, she's married to people we know. We're all like family. So you get your information that way. Now I see, moving forward, I'm not familiar with Measure G, whether I voted for it, whether I remember reading about it. We come here now, they breaking people up. They like to divide and separate, divide. So you get a little information here, a little information. Whoever's going to come in needs to represent, give the information. They say they send flyers. The only thing I ever get is from Maxine. I live, work, and fellowship. I go to Macedonia Baptist Church, 45 years, the oldest, largest church in Watts. I work for Watts Healthcare. That's in a crisis. I don't shop at Food for Less. I can't even go in there, get a dozen of eggs because the people who do you call? I call Public Works. We always have these meetings over the years. Now they have developed where you're going to bring a CEO or everybody here that's representing. Do you live in the community? Do you live down the street? Who are you really representing, your organization or yourself? What's going to happen with these people? Because they're always out in the community. Now, you want to put it, we never had a board of supervisors in Watts Willowbrook. Now you've developed all of these things, and we need to make sure collectively, because I just found out I sold my son 2 houses for $400,000 across the street. And I said, oh, son, I saw the appraisal, $1.5 million. I'm worth $2.5 million. I said, well, wait a minute. I want you to create family wealth. I didn't want to sell, quote, I'm sorry, my birth certificate say Negro. I'm not trying to disrespect. I said, I don't want to sell my property to the white man. We want to keep our property in our community so we can create our family wealth for our children and grandchildren. So I hope that this is effective. I'll go back. What school board, sir, you sit on, the LA? Oh, you live on Linwood. See, I just feel that everybody's represented. I know everybody on the Compton School Board. It's interesting. Here, my family member right here, Lisa live on the Compton borderline. We right here. I find her talking to people in the community. Oh, Tanya, you know they moved the borderline to Magic Johnson Park down as Watts Willowbrook. They keep redistricting. We never have the information because it's the needle in the haystack, the best kept secret. And I'm a person who go to attend the meetings, and I'm just older now. I'm 65. I'm getting wore out. And I'm like, okay, what are they doing in our community? But I still love my community, and I want to represent my community. And I thank you guys, and God bless this family right here. And I love my community. Ain't where you live, it's how you live.
All right, where we go? Right behind you.
Mixed opinion. Unincorporated, I got involved because of friends. Engage, educate. I don't know. It's crazy. As she was just saying, if I weren't engaged, if I weren't a part of something, I would know nada. And because I sent out some blast emails, I did not go to school in this community. I came from entertainment. And I work near Santa Clarita, but live over here. So I get a lot of information. And at the end of the day, we should be getting more things over here. And you said statement, I could go on and on. I'm not, and we are not.
All right, we're about done. All right, last question.
All right, one last question. All right, go ahead.
My question is the same as the two young ladies down there. Is where do we get the information so we can stay engaged and participate in this redistricting that's going to come to the communities?
All right, last question is, where do they get information around this implementation, redistricting? Where do you get that? Sarah?
So I think your county rep is here, right? I'm guessing this is Holly Mitchell's district, right? Again, I don't work for the county, but I do also understand that there is a Measure G email blast that you can sign up for. I can find that link for folks and read that out. It was literally just sent to me this morning. I'm sure Empowerment Congress can as well, but I think connecting with your supervisor's office is a great way of getting more information on Measure G.
For this workshop, we will make sure you get a resource link with resources you can go and find information. The last one is going to be made by Miss Sandy, who's an OG. But before we do that, can we just give a round of applause to our panel? Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mary Lee. Now, Miss Sandy, he's an OG from Empowerment Congress. Last word.
I just wanted to piggyback on the sister who mentioned the Ernestine Wilsons and the Wendy Tates. I am the director at Willowbrook Senior Center. Up until 2 years ago, I could host having people come in and share information. Within the last 2 years, as a county employee, we can no longer do that. Okay? So it's going to take the community to advocate for letting us come back to places like Willowbrook, to East Rancho, to Florence Firestone, to have these meetings so that you all can get the information. I can't tell you how many seniors came up to me after the election and asked me about Measure G.
So we're going to organize. There will be a working group that will happen from this meeting to figure out how can we influence the implementation of Measure G moving forward. We will send out an email if you register for this or if you just register for the Empowerment Congress in general to let you know when that meeting happens, because your education will determine how you can advocate for your policy and make sure that equity implementation actually happens in LA County. Thank you all for coming out to this workshop. I'm holding you from lunch, so please go get your lunch box. And if you need to talk to the county person, I think he can hang around a little bit too. Yeah, talk to the Alfonso from the county from Valley Mitchell's office.